Hello, my lovelies. I'm not going to avoid avoidance. I'm going to address it. I'm going to address it head on. You know, we tend to be two types of people. We tend to be someone that goes towards issues, which is me, or we run away from them. Let me just plug myself in. How is everyone? Happy half term. Oh. Right, there we go. Now, the reason I want to talk about avoidances is because it will come up as part of the change curve. And just remember, guys, think about the ways that as humans we go towards pleasure and away from pain. I just said that, don't we? That's what we do as human beings. So some people go towards pain. I'm a problem solver, so I'll go towards a problem. And there is a saying, which I heard the other day, if you're not scared of feeling any of your feelings, then you won't be scared of anything. Which is true, isn't it? Like, we're not scared of the dark. We're scared of what we might find there and how it makes us feel. So I think when we go through the change process, if we're moving from one place to another, so say we come to coaching and we've been bullied and we've been rejected and we've got no friends. Wow! We're going to feel a shed load of feelings. And that's a grief process, right? So in order to move over here, which is the person that we become more resilient, what have we learned from the bullying? But we can't get over here to, ta-da, I'm fine now, until we've worked through all the feelings. And sometimes when we have a lot of feelings and around something which is traumatic, and we all find different things traumatic, but we are going through a global pandemic, as I said, and that is traumatic, then there will be a lot of feelings. And it might not feel safe enough for us to feel, right? So we have to go slow, we have to be patient, we have to do a little bit at a time, and we have to give control where we can, give choices. Okay, so an example of that would be, so you're listening to the podcast and then it's bringing up a lot of feelings, and then your child starts to kind of say, oh, no, I don't want to listen to that tonight, and I don't really want to listen to Smiley. And it's a bit like when you've got to start a pile of ironing, when you've got a tricky piece of homework to do, when you need to go to the gym because you've got to lose weight or you're trying to keep yourself fit. Lots of feelings come rushing in, right? We procrastinate. Procrastination can also be the the blocker of perfectionists, because they're going, is there a right way to listen? Is there a right way to feel? No, I can't tell you how to feel. Only you know how to do that, because you're in your body and that's on you. So you've got to actually start to feel and practice feeling and what feelings feel like for you. And also know that whatever you're feeling is okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. It's interesting. A lot of parents will say to me, oh, well, they're listening and it's just upsetting them. No, it's not upsetting them. What's happened to them has created lots of feelings inside their body that they haven't felt. And they need to be processed and understood and validated and made sense of. So it's not something that's upsetting you. It's triggering off stuff that's already inside of you. Okay? Now, if you're a parent who finds it hard to be with feelings. So perfectionistic parents do, because they're up here in the story and they want to be in control and they want to be the one to fix it and pacify. And also, they also might have a lot of strong feelings. You know, if we've got weak boundaries, you know, then we will take on other people's feelings. But also, children can become avoidant depending on how people around them respond to their feelings. So that's also another reason why. Like, for example, I hear it out on my walks, I hear it in the supermarket, I hear it from children, from members of staff at schools. Again, not making anyone wrong, just sharing stories, because it's an education piece, isn't it? Oh, don't cry. No, don't cry. Stop crying now. No, don't cry. Don't start crying. No, don't start crying. You can't say that to someone that's got tears that need to come out. And actually, tears are the body's way of trying to regulate the nervous system. So the tears have chemicals when you release them. they come out, and that calms us down. So your body is trying to do the most natural thing. That's why when babies cry, I think sometimes when mums carry unhealed trauma and their babies cry and they can't pacify them, they internalise that as, I'm a bad mother, or there must be something wrong with me because I can't soothe my child. Babies don't really have many options for communicating with us, and they're usually communicating that they're hungry, lonely, that they want something from us. So yeah, and I think we get into kind of, if you can co-regulate with your child, then they'll learn to self-soothe. When we distract them, or we are their only source of comfort, so everything is about us. The mum that does everything, the child doesn't want to be with the dad, you must come to me when you're sad, because the mum's running a tape of, if you don't come to me, if you don't choose me to soothe you, then I'm not doing my job properly as a mum. It's not necessarily true, because a good parent is a parent that teaches their child how to self-soothe. And that's what the podcast does. But what I also do is I get the children to acknowledge the feelings that they have, and I validate their feelings. Now, if they haven't had their feelings validated, if they're surrounded by people that are going, don't cry, it's okay, don't cry. My dad used to kind of like pat me and be like, don't cry. But that's how that's making the adult feel. Okay, adult, you need to learn how to regulate your own feelings. And you almost need to be, obviously you're concerned when you see your child distressed. That's a natural response as a parent. But if you're so distressed that you need your child to be a certain way to regulate your feelings, that needs looking at with a trained therapist. That needs a therapist to look at that, because that's not your child creating that in you. That was created, those buttons were created a long time ago, and they need looking at. Attachment styles, I won't get into that now because that's a whole other video, but I have talked on here about attachment styles. So people who are avoidantly attached find a lot of big emotions really overwhelming. So if you find when your child's, displaying big emotions and that overwhelms you, that's also a cue that you need help with something. It's okay to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with you. But you've got to take responsibility. We've got to take responsibility for our own healing in order to be able to heal our kids. And with parents that are carrying trauma and are blocked, they have a sort of ceiling on all feelings, even the happy ones, because you can't selectively numb feelings. So if you're numbing out sadness and anger, you're going to get a lot of anxiety. That's why children are anxious, because they're having to sit in a classroom all day and be good in the middle of a global pandemic. How ridiculous is that? It's just ridiculous. And then people go, yeah, but you can't have a classroom full of crying kids. No, but what if you just let children have their feelings, and then you had 10 minutes in the morning where you taught them how to calm themselves down? And then over time, it'd be messy to start off with, but over time it would be all right, wouldn't it? But no, going back to that ceiling, because I can remember being a child and getting super hyped up and excited, and really, I just thought of it now when I was cleaning the bathroom, because I could hear the kids outside in the flats behind me in the garden laughing, and there's nothing like the sound of children laughing, is there? There's nothing like it. It just literally fills your heart with joy. But if you're a parent that carries trauma and you're keeping a lid on all of your feelings, sometimes a child that's laughing or overexcited too much will irritate you. It'll make you snappy, be like, calm down, stop it. And I can remember my parents being, at the end of their rope, and the four of us all playing and fighting and being too noisy, and then them snapping. That's nothing to do with us just being kids laughing and being kids. That's something inside of them. And you don't have the capacity to feel all your feelings if you're carrying trauma. So it just shows you how powerful the podcast is. That's what I'm saying to people. It's a powerful tool because it's doing the job it's meant to do. And I want to say to those people that have dipped their toe in the water and maybe gone, oh my God, I think I've just been bitten by a crab, and ran back to the beach to get some more ice cream or however you're stuffing your feelings in. keep trying it. The guidance I will give you, stutter, the guidance I will give you is to go slow, is to keep reassuring your child that's okay, that's your body, you know, that's your body's natural response to what's happened to you. Like, really, we can't say how someone's emotional response to a situation, a person, or a thing is right or wrong. We can't judge it. We need to be curious about it. Tell me more about why Billy makes you cross. Tell me more about why listening to Smiley is upsetting you. But really, you say, well, of course you're upset because of all the things that have happened to you. And Smiley's talking about them again, and that's bringing all the feelings up to the surface. And that's good because we need to get them out. It's like having a poo, isn't it? You're a bit emotionally constipated. And when you start doing that, that might feel a little bit uncomfortable. But it's just a little bit of discomfort. And I always think it's really telling, isn't it? Because this is the question you want to ask yourself as an adult. How do you feel when you see another child crying? Or how do you feel when you see another child melting down? If, like me, you have to leave the supermarket, I think if it's a child I know, like if it's my niece or it's one of my clients and I'm in a coaching zone, then obviously I know how to deal with that. But if I'm out doing my shopping and I'm like in Lisa World and I'm just doing stuff and it's all kicking off, that can just whoosh in out of nowhere and really take hold of you. And it just shows you your ability to sit with your own discomfort and pain. And if it's too painful, then it needs looking at by a trained therapist, preferably not just a counsellor. You want someone who's a psychotherapist who specialises in complex childhood trauma, because that's what it is. You're just carrying old stuff, old wounds from your childhood, and they need looking at. But obviously I'm talking to a load of avoidant people here, so they're going to be like, oh yes, thank you Smiley, that's great, just shut this down, shut this shit down, don't look at it. That's what happens. I can always tell when I'm talking to an avoidant parent, because when we start to go deep, when the conversation starts to go from up here, how are you, how's the weather, how are the kids, down to how are you feeling, when we go from there to there, we start to get emotionally vulnerable. It's not safe. So that's why, how do we create emotional safety? Through connection over time. We go really slowly. We meet the child in the space where they are, and we go at the pace they're at. And that's why people say, how long do we need to listen for? How long is a piece of string? Like, you're building a relationship up with me over time. And you are, because look at the powerful effects it's having on people. Unfortunately, it's making people, some people, not all people, turn off. But that's a signal that that's something for them to address. There's nothing wrong here. You're going through a change process. There's lots of feelings. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with the podcast. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with the process. There might be a few things wrong with the world. That's another conversation for another day, isn't it? But, you know, just remain curious and empathetic and gentle and kind. Go slowly, lots of cuddles, give your child control. Would you like to stop now if that's upsetting you? But like anything that becomes avoidant, what you resist persists. So if you start making that a thing. So I had a mum actually that rang me a few weeks ago and said, oh, why don't you do face-to-face coaching? Because, you know, I don't really want to do the online stuff. So on further probing, it turned out that something had happened with a teacher online. And she was like, so, you know, and it was all her stuff. It was nothing to do with her daughter. I don't want that to happen online. Well, that's exactly what needs to happen. She needs to come online and have a positive experience with someone else and in a trusted, you know, connection, which means that she can work through all of those icky feelings and, you know, and then that wouldn't be a thing anymore. But by going, oh no, and then talking about it and going, well, you don't want to do the online thing, you don't want to do the online, and making a story about it, it makes it this big hot potato of something that nobody wants to hold. And when you're in a family of avoidant people, pass the hot potato around like that, and there's normally one poor sod, usually the most emotional feeling member of the family, that holds the hot potato for the whole family. And they're the one that usually comes undone, and they're the one that usually ends up in therapy first of all. So, yeah, feelings aren't messy, guys. They're only messy if you don't know what to do with them, you don't understand them, you make judgments about them, and you tell stories about them and you think they're wrong or not good. Like, we tend to label things, don't we? We go, that's a bad feeling, an uncomfortable feeling, a wrong feeling, a naughty feeling, a not allowed feeling, and that one is a good feeling. And you don't want to get into toxic positivity where your goal is to eradicate all of the feelings on this side and only feel these ones, because then you get sick, you get depressed, and you get anxious. And actually, you can't eradicate feelings. You can't pick and choose them. You know, if your chakras are aligned, if your thinking brain is wired up to your heart brain and your gut brain, if those three things are all talking to each other, then, you know, that's how things are meant to work. But when we start to intellectualize, so often, I think that's why my report for parents is so popular, because parents want to get up in the story, intellectualize, why is this happening? What's going on? I need answers. I need to sort it out. And the minute you get them to drop down into their hearts, into their bodies, I mean, it's very overwhelming when your child is distressed, isn't it? And you feel helpless and powerless to do anything about it. But actually, if you can't go into that space, that means that there's something living in that space, an old hurt, where you felt powerless and hopeless as a child. Many of us did. That happens to most of us in life at some point. And that needs looking at. That's like a wound, a hurty bit that's going to keep popping open. And what happens is, if you don't attend to your wounds, then you give the same wounds to your children, unconsciously, of course. But we don't want that, do we? Because we're trying to break the cycle here, because we want more than that for them. So while I'm online talking about avoidance, if you have any questions, please pop them in, or if you're watching on the replay, pop them down below. I used to be a real feeler until some things happened to me in my life where I felt such intense grief. Oh, I'm getting choked up talking about it, that I became very avoidant. And, you know, I've got post-traumatic stress disorder. So obviously, when you have PTSD, you become avoidant of places, people, or anything that reminds you of the thing that you're grieving. And the grief is complex grief because it's mixed in with other things. If you know my story, you know what I'm talking about. And then that's what makes feeling hard. And then I think the thing is with PTSD, or the thing is with that, is then you start to feel ashamed of the way that you feel, because it's all complicated and mixed up. You start to feel ashamed, then you start to isolate yourself, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you go, well, I don't really want to see those people, and then, oh, I feel bad about what's happening, and then, oh, I'll just stay here, and then you stay stuck in isolation. And that's really common with people who've got complex post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD, because you're trying to avoid the thing that's making you feel the feelings. And you can have what's called, well, you have emotional flashbacks. So all the feelings that are linked into the event that took place, the traumatic event that took place, all get triggered off. So, for example, I could be in Waitrose doing a food shop, and a man could be passing wind or thinking about his gas bill, and as he makes eye contact with me, he makes an expression of contempt at me. This trapped wind, or his really high electricity bill, looks like one of my parents who used to give me a look of contempt. And then I flash back to that 6, 7, 8-year-old version of myself who would then be physically punished or sent to my room. And I find myself, because the trauma's not stored in here, guys. We don't have to remember the trauma. It's stored in here. I find my body being flooded, almost flooded, like an engine is flooded, like when you when you used to start your car and the engine used to flood and then it wouldn't start anymore. And I guess what you learn to do is you learn to be aware of your triggers. I didn't intend to talk about this, but I'm going to keep going because I think it's an interesting share, because if you're a parent that's triggered by your child, this will be what is happening to you. You have to be aware of what your triggers are. Mine aren't just, people in Waitrose that look like they've got wind. I'm making light of it because it's a horrible subject to talk about, really, but it's probably one that needs talking about. So it isn't just looks of contempt. It can be smells, it can be songs, it could be places, it could be anything, really. Then you have to learn what or who your triggers are. You have to learn how to create emotional safety. That's why you need a therapist, because you need to create secure attachment. So I wonder how many of you on here know what your attachment style is. I wonder how many of you know, aware that you're emotionally avoidant. Like if you are a busy person that keeps busy all the time, like is always on the go and never really stops, that's a sign that you're avoidant, that you're not able to sit with yourself. And if you're like that, guess what? Your kids are going to be like that as well, because that's what they're being role modelled. And it's not wrong or bad, it's just that you need to work out what you're running from, and that's something that happened, way back when, so that's on you to sort that out. You just got to take responsibility for your healing. So maybe the podcast should come with a warning. That's why I would quite like therapists and teachers to use it, therapists and counsellors to use it, because they will know how to kind of steer the ship, as it were. They'll recognise what's happening in their client, or they should do, and they'll know when stuff's coming up, that's all part of the process. You need a great deal of trust. You need a great deal of trust in what you can't see. So if you're panicking because your child's panicking, there's no trusting going on. When you go into that panic space, you naturally want to control something. You're not in control of it. So that could be quite difficult. But there is an option on the podcast. So there's a monthly subscription, and there is an option to have a VIP. So you can have me guiding you. You can have sessions with me in between. That's not to put you off and scare you, because it's a good thing to educate yourself in this stuff. And I think if you don't educate yourself and you don't do this very important piece of work as part of being a parent and as part of being or working with children and knowing yourself in this emotional way, if you don't meet yourself in that space, then it's going to be very hard for you to meet your child in that space. And your capacity to love also is very limited when you're carrying all that stuff around with you. And your child will feel that, or feel the lack of that. It's very complicated. I'm trying to summarise it in a really quick video. But I suppose what I want to say is, let's have conversation about it. And then I'm going, well, that makes sense, Lisa, doesn't it? Because you keep bitching and moaning and whining about the fact that no one on this page wants to talk. Because I keep trying to have really deep conversations with people that are probably quite emotionally avoidant. So that makes sense, doesn't it? So I'm screwed, really. I'll have to wait for you all to have your dark night of the soul, and for you to be at capacity of feelings where you're either depressed or highly anxious, or your kids are acting out and it's becoming too much. That's why people call me when it gets to that point. Whereas if you do the preventative maintenance and you do it now, you won't reach that point. But I'm saying, trust me now, believe me later. But that's something also that I'm not in control of. That's for you to decide. Anyway, it's powerful, that Truly Madly Smiley podcast. It's not to be feared. We must look our fears straight in the eye and say, you are not the boss of me. I'm not scared of you. Because there's nothing that you can't feel. You're made to feel. And if feeling is difficult, if feeling is overwhelming, then please take care of yourselves and get that looked at, okay? All right, everyone. Happy half term. Bye for now.